All right, now we're finally ready. Thanks everybody for waiting patiently, and welcome to our first in-person lecture since the spring of 2020. Wow. Yeah, no, it's really great to be sharing space again for events like this. And I'm happy to see people here and then also online. So it's kind of a interesting hybrid we're in. So I'm Nate Fash, and I'm chair of our events committee along with Andrew Cohen. And it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers tonight, along with Dean White, who will join me in a little bit. Many of you know I'm a real supporter of collaboration generally, and especially in architecture and teaching. So I was really delighted when I first saw Warren Schwartz, Peter Kleiner, and John Travacante present as a team at the Graduate Studio Lottery last year as visiting firm in residence. And then again to see them return this fall as a triumvirate, which I believe is real evidence of a deep value in the collective spirit of their work. John is attending his daughter's wedding, but we're delighted to have a duet performance here from Warren and Peter, who are going to share their reflections on the work of Schwartz Silver. The lecture tonight is titled Constraints, and it's accompanied by a beautiful exhibition put together with the help of our very own graduate student, Amanda Miller. And yeah. And I also want to thank Heather Wilson, who's instrumental, as always, in making our exhibitions and announcements a reality. Schwartz Silver is based in Boston and has been making architecture since 1980. Today, they're a collective of about 25 people, serving academic institutions, libraries, museums, public agencies, and private individuals. They describe their work as striving to respect history and context while being forward-looking and authentic. And as I mentioned, their process is centered around collaboration and thoughtful engagement. They believe in accepting the idea of individual incompleteness, which I really like, and that the partial insights of one person can be supplemented or enhanced by the partial insights of another, be they an architect, a user, a client, or an engineer, or someone else. And that kind of open collaboration helps design be more relevant, more responsive, and leads towards unpredictable and varied outcomes based on the particular circumstances of a project. The work of the office has been widely published and has received dozens of awards at the local, regional, and national level, including multiple AIA national awards. Peter Kleiner is a principal and has been responsible for projects at a variety of scales, including Peresky Commons at Phillips Academy, the McCoy Federal Building in Jackson, Mississippi, and currently the District Courthouse in Dedham, Mass, and the Edward Janot Courthouse in Portland, Maine. He also serves as a commissioner of the Town of Brookline's Preservation Commission, and he received his B.Arch from Syracuse University. Warren Schwartz is founding principal and has been project designer of several of the firm's most honored projects, including the Shaw Center for the Arts and MIT's Roach Architecture Library, which was on the announcement. He's a frequent juror for AIA awards and scholarships and is actively involved in professional and civic organizations. He received his B.Arch from Cornell and a Master's of Architecture and Urban Design from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And in 1 second, I'll invite Dean White to say a few words. But let's first give a really warm in-person welcome to Warren and Peter.
Thanks very much. I'm taking my mask off on the premise that I'm far enough away, and I just want to say a few words about coming back. It's great that we're all back remotely, and all of us that are here. It's great to hear clapping and see smiles as close up as we do, even through our masks. And it's great that Schwartz Silver, and particularly Warren and Peter and John, have come back. In my hands right here, I have an exhibition flyer from 1992, which doesn't necessarily seem all that long ago to people like me and maybe Warren. There was an exhibition here in 1992 when the name of this institution was Roger Williams College, called Virtue of Reality. And it was the work of Schwartz Silver at that point. And I found a bunch of these, and I gave everyone that I could find except 2 or 3 of these that I'm hanging on to for the school. So that Warren and everyone at the firm could have them. The other idea about coming back is that Warren and Peter and John were here last year when we had our first semester of fully remote or fully hybrid teaching, and they came as often as they could, and in whatever numbers that we could, however many we could be together with in any small space. And so I asked if they would come back so that we could share them a little more, and they could see what we're like when we're back in person. And it's great to see the work. It's great to see the friendliness and the collegiality about architecture and just about people that Peter and Warren and I'm sure all the rest of the firm have had, and the way you've shared that with Amanda and others. So we really appreciate you being here, and welcome back. Thanks so much.
Exhibition, which is I can't say it's nostalgic, but it is 40 years because I think of it as 40 years and counting. So so that's thank you, Amanda. At Schwartz Silver, we value design, but really don't have a unified design philosophy that we articulate very often. We like to build beautiful buildings, and that's a goal for all of our projects, whether it's a house, a museum, a fire station, a library, or whatever.
So for this lecture, we wanted to share our perspective really as practicing architects and give some insight into our design process. We really like to solve problems, particularly very difficult problems, and that's really sort of a hallmark of our practice. And our solutions develop from the unique insights and circumstances of the projects that we're working on, or those constraints. We wanted to talk about our projects through those constraints of what they are. That we work so that these are not limitations or barriers in our projects, but rather the drivers of design. So form follows problem, if you will. We believe the constraints of a project make great architecture, and arguably better than if we had a blank slate. There are really very few projects that we think of that exist as true tabula rasa architecture that are just sort of driven by design philosophy solely. And even these most iconic buildings had to contend with some of the forces we're discussing tonight. Some quick internet research reveals that this concept isn't new. Apparently Leonardo had a similar thought, or maybe with Michelangelo. The internet hasn't decided quite yet. But my money's on Michelangelo, and even if he didn't mumble the words, he did it in almost all his work. And whether that was creating an illusion of a perfect Renaissance environment at the bizarre existing buildings at Capitoline Hill, or creating one of the most memorable staircases in a leftover space in the San Lorenzo complex, or creating David from a block of marble that had been rejected by other sculptors, considered unworkable. Truly, he's one of the greatest architects in history, and knew the constraints on budget, site, existing buildings, client vision, and how to make those constraints truly great art. So there's 7 themes we're going to review tonight: site, existing buildings, budget, process, sustainability, regulations, and program. So let's start with site. So we encourage everyone always draw the context. If you don't design with your site, your design is incomplete. In fact, it can be really the key to your whole project. If you don't have a spectacular cliff in Capri, Even odd sites are a great opportunity for design. The Haussmann plan in Paris created dozens of odd-shaped sites throughout Paris. And Anton Lepautre's plan uses that odd shape as really the driver to create brilliant architecture. While we're in Paris, we wanted to focus on the Maison de Verre, which is one of our favorites by Pierre Chareau. The site is a small site within a courtyard. It's fairly concealed from public view, but it has one of the most memorable pieces of architecture in the early part of the 20th century. The constraint was it was in an apartment building, and it wasn't the full apartment block. They didn't own the top floor, so they had to support that floor during the construction, and then install the full glass wall in front of that. That glass wall then provided the well-lit interiors of the inside, where you can see the steel columns that supported that. The upper floors really become a primary feature in that building. So really using that site and that process to inform what the building is going to look like.
So the MIT library, one of our earliest projects, in fact, was our second built project. It was a project for the art and architecture library, and it was driven by constraints of the site. After an exhaustive search for a site on the MIT campus, after something like 17 studies, the best and only preferred site was the one which was on the facade of the architecture building, which turned out to be the service and delivery zone of most of MIT's connected buildings. What you're looking at is the truck turnaround, which MIT used for the deliveries for everything that was going on there at MIT. And I don't know that I knew that MIT had a football team, but actually they did ask the coach and his I guess team to draw the in chalk where the building would come down to see if it would actually work, and it did. So they went forward. The site's located at the rear of the domed main building on Mass Avenue. It's the smaller dome of the two, and the design had to keep this path and truck turnaround open after construction was complete. When we thought about it, the building had no other site per se. It was, we thought if we could hang the building from the roof with all but a few columns touching the ground, I think there's something like 10 locations, we could solve the problem. We could maintain MIT's treasured delivery zone. And so the solution became a quasi-suspension bridge.
So another project that I'll talk about site is McCoy Federal Building. And there are many unique aspects of this project, but I want to highlight some of the constraints of the site that really drove our design. The existing building had a unwelcoming civic plaza in front that eroded the edge of Capitol Street, which is the main street in downtown Jackson, Mississippi. Our new entry pavilion was to reestablish that edge of Capitol Street, create a different contrasting architecture to the harsh architecture of the existing federal building, and create generally a more welcoming landscape. This site area that we had was in fact very small, and the pavilion was a small part of the project, was a full renovation of 425,000 square feet of the federal tower. So not only was the site small, but there was another catch. The Army Corps of Engineers had a stormwater culvert that ran through the entire site that diverted a tributary of the Pearl River through the downtown. So early on, we did an analysis and we determined that a small column could rest on a center bearing wall, and the existing capacity of that storm culvert, the structure of it could easily support that column. It's like about 3 kips, not a big load. So during construction, we were advised that the federal government was not going to seek approval for that column, and we didn't have that. So we had about 30 feet of our pavilion left unsupported. So the contractor had a brilliant solution. He said, just cut it off and redesign the pavilion. So we sat and we thought about it, and I looked at the framing model, and I called our structural engineer, Anton Nelson, and I said, hey, Anton, you know, I paid a little bit of attention in my structural engineering classes, and I'm pretty sure that this truss we have, that we're really only about a third of the cantilevers for the full backspan of this truss. Oh, and furthermore, this whole thing is welded, so it's a full moment frame. And so, can't we basically treat this like a race car chassis? It's sort of a welded frame. We just have to support it up a few dozen feet in the air. So, like a good engineer, he listened to me, and then told me I was absolutely insane and hung up. But like a truly exceptional engineer, he called me back and he said, you know what, I looked at it and your idea works. And what we can do is I can use this wall on the other side too to also reinforce and make that a truss so that we can fully support this 30-foot span without that column. And in fact, we're not actually increasing the load of steel. Some of these columns are actually going to act in tension because of the overturning of this whole roof form and during certain wind conditions. So the project went ahead. It was built as originally intended, just without a column. And it's something that we're very proud of. And in fact, the site there's just another aspect of the site that we use to provide inspiration. As we were designing it, we found these beautiful drawings done in 1944 that show the changing contours and meanders of the Mississippi River over geologic time. And we used that as the inspiration for this, and noted how the river, the Mississippi, has been around for millions of years, and yet still it somehow hasn't figured out how to go in a straight line. And it constantly is sort of changing and weaving its way around obstacles. And somewhere there's probably a metaphor in there for the federal government, or maybe just our design processes. So much of our work at Schwartz Silver is to existing buildings, and we are really well known for transforming existing buildings. There will be, in your careers, more existing buildings to work on than new construction. So it's a good thing Roger has a robust historic preservation program. In many cases, we work on buildings by famous architects, such as H.H. Richardson, Charles Bulfinch, Guy Lowell, or in this case, McKim, Mead, and White at Brown University. Our philosophy has always been to respect the inherent character of these existing structures and then look for opportunities to add a layer of history with new modern interventions. At the campus center, by keeping a suite of spaces en palade, we shifted the access in the existing building from the center line to just off center. And this allowed us an opportunity on the other end to change the way we could experience the building on campus. This is one of the main entrances to the Brown campus, and there is a connecting path right through the center of the building, which before we started was a unremarkable brick arch passageway. And we saw this as an opportunity to connect the internal part of the building with a new glass entranceway, and therefore transform this entrance to the building and this entrance to the campus with something more light-filled and modern at this entrance. The Historic Preservation Act was created in 1966. It protects buildings that are 50 years old and older. And as with some irony that we're now at the point of protecting some of the most divisive designs that were the reason for that act. Brutalist designs of the 60s through 80s are now historic buildings. And some people like them very much, such as us. but for most people, they consider these buildings to be ugly. So how can you love a brew? This existing building had a moat around it that was separated entirely from the campus. It had very small windows to the interior, so those interior spaces were very dark. We filled up the moat. We provided a new light-filled entrance with a monitor to bring light deep into the building footprint, and then strategically added larger windows around the exterior. So you can see the changes to the character were subtle, but made a big impact on the exterior, including a clearer entrance, changing the existing entrance and internal circulation to a more warm and light-filled building, using the existing wood accents and continuing that throughout the building as a way to unify it with the existing. The stairway was transformed with the light monitor from above and changing some of the texture, including a mural that included quotes from a commencement speech from Kurt Vonnegut that we found as very inspirational. Those dark spaces around the interior became light-filled study rooms and collaboration spaces for the new library. So budget is something that we have to focus on in all of our projects, and it's something that is not often talked about, we feel, but it's something that is really critical to making your projects succeed.
So the National Music Museum is a project which has been in the office for almost 12 years. Architecture is not for the impatient. The museum is a small building on the campus of the University of South Dakota. It was originally a Carnegie Library. Like many things in the Dakotas, it's difficult to get to, but it has one of the most amazing collections of musical instruments in the world. Something like 30,000 objects. After 35 years, it was running out of space. The board's aspirations were for it to be a world-class destination museum. And so initially, we developed a design that would maximize the existing site by connecting to another campus building on the left. The goal was to create a design that would generate donor interest in a national fundraising campaign that would span from coast to coast. The initial budget was $17 million in 2010. But initial fundraising expectations proved too ambitious, and we simplified the design to stay within the limitations of that budget, which was now, they had reduced it from 17 million to the $4 to $6 million range. What do? Program and square footage was cut to a minimum. The building still connected both buildings on the site, but it had shrunk to a width of 21 feet. It had to become a beautiful lobby/corridor with linear galleries on the second floor. A few more years passed. We liked it, but as it turned out, the university didn't want to build just a corridor. So more time passed. We're somewhere around 2017 now. A new director was named, and finally, the arts faculty created a very focused building campaign, relying on money from state and federal grants, as well as more realistic fundraising effort, with an expanded donor base and a special donor. We had another more modest but realistic budget of $9.5 million to work with. By the way, this includes as much as possible renovations of the exhibits within the existing building. 10 years later, the new design was smaller than the original, but bigger than the corridor scheme 6 years out. It did not connect the two existing buildings, but instead found storage space for the collections off-site. It proposed renovating the existing museum galleries, and that's now underway. And the addition is now complete with offices, conservation spaces, a new lobby entrance, a new large traveling gallery, and a new 130-person recital hall, all scaled down from the original $17 million design, but consistent with the original program for the museum. This is that was a construction shot. It was not. It's finished on the outside somewhat and without landscaping. So after almost 12 years, the museum construction has now moved inside the existing building to complete the fundraising effort and provide a completely new museum experience for visitors with redesigned galleries throughout. That's the new traveling gallery. And actually it opens into the recital hall. At this point, I want to pause and address the question you may be thinking, is this a disappointment? Well, 12 years later. Wouldn't you rather have the original larger project in your portfolio? Actually, no. The goal is to have projects built that benefit our clients. The larger project would have been a financial burden for the institution, depleted their endowment, and kept them from their mission of preserving the instruments. At the end of the project, all the lost designs and war stories disappear, and you have a building, and that building needs to stand on its own and be something an owner can maintain. If you don't accommodate the budget constraint, you'll only have beautiful renderings.
So in our studio, we talk a lot about process, and this is not so much the design process, but the outside forces of process that impact us. Now, as a student, you may be talking to your colleagues that aren't in the architecture program and commenting on how odd the design crit is. It's truly something unique in academia that doesn't really exist outside of architecture schools. When I was in school, the design crit was nerve-wracking. It could be brutal and sometimes cruel. Exhausted students hadn't slept in days, wept. And you may say to yourself, how does this prepare me for working in the office when I graduate? I forget to tell you that the public process is worse than the academic design crit sometimes. This is something that a lot of projects will go through. Keep in mind that during the pandemic, many people tuned in to public processes for entertainment. News stories were weekly in terms of what sort of viral event happened at some public meeting. You will see the most remarkable things happen in public meetings where people of all different opinions feel the need to be heard. A 15-minute procedural can take hours. So you need to get your projects through that. And if you make the mistake of not taking that into consideration, your project will suffer for that. In some cases, the timeline for the project, the construction is the shortest part of the schedule. The review process can take years. So we need to incorporate this into our process and how we design. There's an old expression that a camel's a horse designed by committee. And I feel that you don't have to look too far today to see many architectural camels that are the result of a design-driven process through a committee. The goal of many development projects is to get through as quickly as possible, and compromises are made all the time. Worse, I think that designs are starting out as compromises to address all the things that people ask in meetings. Can you break down the scale? Can you change materials? Can you add some brick? Can you add bays and relate it to the context? And I feel this is really unfortunate that I've often said that you've never heard people complain that there's too much red brick in Beacon Hill. And we've forgotten that we don't need to use every material in our material library, and that complicated designs are not necessary to create great architecture in great cities. So for me, one of the first projects I worked on at Schwartz was a Hyde Park Library, which was a beautiful Carnegie building in a neighborhood of Boston, which happened to be the mayor's of Tom Menino's neighborhood at that time, where he grew up. So it was something that was very dear to him. So very early in the process, we were evaluating 3 sites. One was 2 additions to the on the side of this historic building. Another one was something that would create a nice garden with a new volume that was connected to the historic building. And the other one was pretty much a simple extrusion that was a complement of the existing building massing. So I remember there were a number of people in the office that really loved option 2, saw a great possibility in that, creating this garden and this beautiful new element that complemented the existing. But one of the principals in the office said, option 3 is the only option that's going to survive this process. And then he casually added, if the AIA had a competition, option 3 would win. The AIA awarded this building a National Honor Award, one of its highest honors. The reason it was able to be built is that it is a very clear intent for what the building needs to be. And it allowed everyone to be satisfied. It allowed a plan that could accommodate a functioning library, satisfying the needs of the librarian and the staff. The massing of modern glass box related very simply to the massing of the existing building. The datum lines tied the existing into the new. And the windows of the existing building were related to the proportions of the windows of the curtain wall. So it was very easy to satisfy the historic commission with this type of logic. The interior atrium space allowed the existing historic reading room and the new reading area to connect with minimal staff supervision. And ultimately, the garden that was part of the scheme too, we incorporated in the back was a focal point at the end of the children's room. It's one of the best used spaces in the Hyde Park neighborhood. Another project that went through the gauntlet of the public process is this recent project for the Medford Public Library. And it's a slightly different story. The existing library was an unloved 1960s building. And our design provided a new, efficient floor plan that would maximize the use of this site. During the concept phase, we had some initial concepts about how this would be formed, but it was really left to schematic to further flesh this out this design. But it became very clear that the committee had no love for the flat roof of the existing building, and their one request was that this building have nothing like a flat roof. So we started looking at many options for how to do the massing of this. That continued for several weeks. We wanted to look at options that included the shed roofs that were requested, as well as the gable ends, but also some other forms that we could look through. In the end, what we really wanted to do was create a scheme that could celebrate some of the heritage of the city of Medford, which is known for brick manufacturing and the construction of clipper ships. So the repetitive roofs started to reference some of the manufacturing buildings of repetitive roof forms, but also alluded to waves and sail forms. So getting to consensus can be difficult. Oftentimes, it takes many iterations and continually to looking at and refining these options. But we created a system of roofs which creates rhythm and order on the exterior, but also allows for skylights monitors to come into the existing, into the upper floors of the library building, providing abundant daylight in the building. And so this is the final renderings that were developed, showing that repetitive roof form scheme of arches, and you can see some of the skylights in the interior. And we're very pleased to say that this is almost completed construction, and the client is very happy with it. We're excited for that to open. Those roof forms were also something that was used we are able to determine how to make that work for solar panels. And so this library will be one of the first net zero libraries in Massachusetts, something we're very proud of, and leads us to our next point of sustainability. Sustainability is something that is more and more a driving force in our project. It's something that we try to do in almost all of our projects, where to the greatest extent possible. But it's rare that we have that as the primary driving issue in the projects. The town of Wellesley had that as a goal. It had a requirement for a new town hall space, and its primary goal was for this building to be net zero. So we developed this project to be net zero. And in order to do that, there are many things you have to do to make the building reduce the amount of energy it has and actually generate the energy it needs to on site. So this project has a very compact volume. It has an incredibly thermally efficient envelope, which also means you have to reduce exterior glass. Where you do use glass, it is triple glazed. The interior layout has to be carefully considered to support daylighting. So where there are windows, they're used to the greatest extent possible. We designed an incredibly efficient HVAC system. And there's a large solar array on the roof that basically maximizes the amount of solar generation we get for the footprint that fully supports the square footage we're building. In addition, we made this project a mass timber building so that we could reduce the carbon footprint of the building materials in the construction. But as we progressed, we decided we can go a little better here. So we can go for a project that uses 0 fossil fuels in the transport of materials and actually 0 material waste. We can work at this project to make sure that there's 0 maintenance and 0 operations costs. And we can have one of the lowest energy footprints of any building in the state. How did we do this? The project had another town hall project ongoing at the same time, and we convinced them that we didn't need that new building, at least not quite yet. The most sustainable square footage you can build most sustainable square footage is the square footage you don't build. So we convinced them that by renovating their town hall project, which is a project that was ongoing, we could actually reduce the energy footprint of the town greater than by building this net zero building. So this was a project that had been on the books for a while. The existing town hall really required a full mechanical upgrade, and it required a lot of work to make it work more efficiently for the town. So it has new systems and new floor plates that resolve a lot of the changing envelopes to make this what was considered the crown of Wellesley a fully efficient building. We also analyzed the existing meeting rooms of buildings throughout the town to determine that they didn't need additional meeting space in the town. So this took a very careful data analysis effort to determine the town's true needs for meetings. And then when we designed it, we made sure that we could take this existing building, which was inaccessible, and provide accessibility. And I think this is something that we find is really important and undervalued is making sure that our projects provide universal design. And so this was a project that they had no intention to provide a main door that was accessible, and we're pursuing variances. And I think understanding how you can make your projects better by making them accessible is something that's also important in our firm. And I highlight this idea of the curb cut effect, where a lot of these universal design things really benefit everybody. It's sometimes referred to as the curb cut effect, where it's not just providing accessible features for people with disabilities, it's providing things that benefit everybody. And so that leads us to regulations, which oftentimes are a driver of our design.
And of course, there are many factors which drive design, but the form of this house was driven originally by inspiration, followed very quickly and ultimately by zoning regulations, particularly the height restriction. My wife and I and 2 kids took a family vacation out west. One of our activities was waking up at 4 a.m. to see the sun rise over the Grand Canyon. We joined the crowd that was assembling in the dark on a large precipice extending into the canyon. I remember they were all speaking different languages. This must have made a large impression on me, because a couple of years later, I made a drawing of a dream I had the night before. In this case, the sun was replaced by large neon spheres that rolled across the sky. We had planned to build a house at Tanglewood, and this viewing platform kept coming into the picture. Instead of following the contours of the land, the house could stretch out from the land and become a kind of platform that we had experienced a few years before. So I made a quick Lego model and started working on the plans. The house was to be entered from the top of the hill and would be held up mid-span by a stairway toward the ground. I then looked at the zoning regulations. The height of the building was limited to 35 feet. And although I thought of the house as only one story, that was not zoning's definition. The hill was sloping quickly, and the height to average grade would have been over 10 feet higher than the zoning allowed. The design had to be rethought. If the upper half of the house could follow the slope down the hill, then the lower half of the house could still stretch out horizontally and become the living, dining, kitchen, and main bedroom platform. The height of the structure could be 17 feet, and it would cantilever almost that same distance above the ground, putting the house within a foot of the maximum height allowed. The form of the house became a chevron, and in a real sense, the form of the house was generated by the zoning regulations. Program is a driver. I don't think that we normally think of program as being anything special, but it really is a constraint. At the same time, it's also a liberator and a generator of design. The Shaw Center is a mixed-use cultural center on the Mississippi River on the prime site in downtown Baton Rouge. Before it became a multi-use theater, a contemporary museum of art, multiple restaurants, and retail stores, it was a parking lot, as was a large portion of the downtown at this time. The downtown development plan had designated this block to be the catalyst for rebuilding the city, starting at its center. And although a community theater was an important piece, it needed more. Concurrently, Louisiana State University, with its 35,000 student population, was planning on expanding the university's art museum and visual arts program. And as the architects for this project, we were chosen probably about a year before that. We had just gotten approval for schematic design. Within a week, I received a call from the university provost asking if we thought we could move the museum and fine arts program downtown to the parking lot, which was designated to be the site of the new community theater. I thought this could get complicated. But since we had no choice in the matter, we decided to look at starting over in a positive light. We thought the only thing better than building would be to keep designing something that would be larger and even more interesting that would be built. What could be better for an architect than to design two major projects combined into one? And so we kept that sort of positivity as a theme throughout the entire project. Once we realized that we didn't have any choice, and so we looked at everything positively. We looked at budget cuts positively. We looked at cutting the length of the building positively, and in fact, we kept thinking, gee, we're designers. We can keep on designing as long as they ask us to do things, which changed the building. So. You know, the question is, would it still be a success? And so I think we came to the answer by working on this. You have a 350 seat theater and two black box theaters with a performer and rehearsal spaces and a theater lobby with a cafe. You have a major university art museum with lobby, galleries, rooftop sculpture court, a gift shop, museum offices, collection storage, and a restaurant leased to a private owner. You have an arts program with arts classrooms, arts faculty offices, and an art gallery for the university's art program. And you have the ground floor uses that activate the city. A city room, basically the combined lobby for both the theater and the museum, private art gallery, restaurants, and rooftop views of downtown and the Mississippi River. How do you put this together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? You can see the pieces here, how they fit, like a puzzle. And as Peter said earlier, we love puzzles, and we love urban puzzles particularly. And so the fly loft in the theater becomes kind of a support for one end of the museum. The museum appears to cantilever over this historic building called the Auto Hotel. It's actually considered an historic building in Baton Rouge because it was built in the 30s. And the wrinkle there was that actually, because it was a parking garage, it wouldn't hold the kinds of uses. So 5 feet from the 5 feet inside all of the surrounding walls were cut away and were replaced with flat floors. So this parking garage actually became a building that was useful for other than cars. So those are the pieces which actually combine. Originally there were 2 groups of trustees, and the 2 groups, one represented the theater, the other represented the museum itself, and actually there were two other I guess concerns that the city itself needed to be kind of fed with public areas and spaces for general sort of urban development. And what happened was that we showed them designs originally, which were the trustees for each of the 2 major parts of the project, the theater and the museum, stood next to one another, and they realized that each one was smaller than the whole, and so they asked us to put them together and to combine them into one. So this is the result. Ultimately, it did win a National Honor Award in 2008, and I think that was by treating the program and changes as positive things can happen. Another building in Baton Rouge, actually diagonally across the street. This is the River Center Library. There's a little mystery about program since it's the basis for most architectural projects. The alchemy is how the program is deployed, combined with the client's vision about how the building will be used. Program is the basis for design discovery, we found out. And program distribution was the primary basis for the design of the River Center Library in Baton Rouge. Here, as distinct from the great Seattle Public Library, book storage was not central to the design. Sure, access to books was important, but equally important were the community aspects of the program, which included both outdoor spaces and climate, all of which gave us clues to the building's form. As well, the librarians were interested in a clear reading of the distribution of uses and age groups in the building. So the entry and the first floor was for everyone. The second floor was for children. The third floor was for teenagers and adults. And the fourth floor was for meetings and parties. This is a public library. So I think the definition of library has been evolving and changing. And I see it and saw it somewhat as it's kind of an adult community center. Really student center, kind of, but for after graduation. The square footage requirements were quite varied and looked something like that when they were stacked. So when they were stacked, you can see they're all different sizes. They really didn't want to actually mix these uses into a building which had a smaller perimeter. So the concept sketch on the left was really how these things would stack up. And we showed them this, and they said, yes, we like that. Well, this is what we want. And so the section on the right shows how the program was actually put together to provide that 2-story tall space right on the public plaza where they have musical events, and to provide also on the 4th floor a large terrace for viewing all kinds of city events. As well, 9 months of the yearly climate can be very hot, humid, and rainy. There's a lot of outdoor music on the streets, and in fact, the main public plaza is right outside the building's entry. See that on the 1st floor. This led to providing a very large public canopy for shade during concerts, gathering, and public cafe, which is also part of the library. The 4th floor, which recently became a public meeting space for City Hall, would also be a great place for parties, weddings, fireworks display, Mardi Gras, and for city and river views in this otherwise very horizontal urban environment. No mountains in Louisiana. Other details of the building were designed to soften glare, reduce heat gain, and provide shade and urban scale to the building mass to call it out as a public building. Finally, the library takes its place in the urban landscape on a main city street between 2 city parks, between one contemporary, one historic government building, and diagonally across from the Shaw Center. And I think with that, we conclude our presentation and open the floor to questions if you have any. Thank you. I think this is a very complicated kind of presentation because we're presenting buildings in the I guess I would say not in as the buildings form, but as really what causes the buildings to form, and that is always behind the scenes, and the artifact is always what you see, but it's not. It's usually never what you can't see. In fact, it's really even difficult to look back and see how the building was formed. So we have tried to kind of go back to the roots of the design and bring that to the fore. This presentation. It's the horizontally, I think. It's not the biggest building because it was actually a catalyst for the design for the development, I should say, of something like at the time we were kind of astounded, a few $1 billion worth of kind of building input. The city after people left, a lot of people left New Orleans because of Katrina. Baton Rouge is located not in a bowl, but actually sort of at a bit of a rise above the Mississippi River. So it was spared, and the city went from something like 300,000 and now to something close to 500,000 people, or maybe 450,000 people. So although people moved to Baton Rouge and then moved back, still people stayed, and I think this is what generated growth in the city, along with the ability and the interest people had in rebuilding the downtown and in a denser way.
Yeah,
I was just wondering about whether there was any kind of pushback about, the extent of the building and whether, it kind of jumped the scale of mass that might be downtown. Was there a lot of resistance?
We got, I actually personally received a lot of tough emails during the design and the construction. They were not nice. And one of the reasons for this is because they had never really seen what I would call a modern building that they liked. And they knew this was, they didn't exactly know what it was going to look like, but they knew it was going to be a modern building. In fact, the design of this building really started out, they asked us to design something that was more akin to a kind of a corn syrup factory, because they put a lot of corn. And they have a lot of very beautiful kind of old factories. As it progressed, people would see this, saw the building under construction, and really had no idea what it was going to look like. In the end, it was sort of like they invited the city to go through the building after they cut the ribbon, and I started getting other emails. They were all incredibly positive. I couldn't believe it.
and I think one of the things is the outsider's perspective, particularly is really vital. And so for us, we went to Baton Rouge, and it's a city on the Mississippi where you can't see the Mississippi because it's a very low city, and you have these levees, the walls that are built along the banks of the Mississippi that it separates the city and the urban environment from the river.
And they're 20 feet high.
And so walking around downtown, you never really get an experience of this, this great river. And so by building tall and having a roof deck, it's one of the few places in Baton Rouge you can see, you can connect to the river. So I think that's something that we learned from that project, which is also when we did the library there, they said, we want that. It's one of the best spaces in downtown. How do we get that? And I think that's something that it takes an outsider's perspective to say, like, you have a really low city that's not really taking advantage of what that site offers. And that's, I think, when people walk through that was one of it basically revealed the city to them. The potential.
They really were two separate projects. And yet, one thing that was very interesting is that one of the original designs for the Shaw Center was to be a museum, which was actually a huge canopy. And as you can see, we never did build that huge canopy, but I think it probably was in people's minds, and did then kind of infect the program for the library. I think they remembered that, and this was probably a better location for that, because the main it looks like a road, but it's a main public square which cars drive on, and they shut down traffic when they have musical events, which is almost all the time. And so that canopy then really serves as a shading device for really a lot of people. So I think that is maybe some kind of connection, not to mention the visual connection from the roof, which is also something which is public. And when we try to see the buildings ourselves, when we try to photograph them from above, it's impossible. There are no other rooftops available in the city. Yes.
Yeah. So, so as one of my hobbies, I'm on my town's preservation commission. So the thing to understand about how preservation, that act works, it's a federal act. And there's legislation that varies by state that enacts that federal act, but it's then enforced locally. And it's generally enforced locally by volunteers. And so that's also why I would encourage you to be on those boards, because oftentimes it's just people that make comments about paint colors and things that they have no real sort of understanding of what the basis is. So there's not consistency in the United States of how the Preservation Act is enforced. And it's really sort of based on each town jurisdiction. So I think you're basically appealing to that and trying to provide good practice. So they vary a lot. My preservation commission has a hard line and won't allow anything but historic buildings in districts to have single pane glass wood windows. Insane. Like this is, and I think this is something that is it varies a lot. So I think I've gone to other boards, towns over, and I said, we're doing this project. We're going to replace all the windows. We're going to use aluminum framed glass, and they said, fine, looks good to us. You know, street. So it's really uneven in terms of how that's enforced. And I think with the example of brutalist buildings, it's something that, as I said, it's not something that has a strong following in a lot of these districts. So some people don't respect them as much as they really deserve to be respected. So they're looking for some change and looking for them to be sort of transformed to something more palatable. So I think we just had a very, and I think we did things that we felt were really, in some ways, very respectful to that building, while allowing it to sort of have life to it.
We did have to sell it. I do remember that.
Yeah.
It was not sold by regulation. It was sold by it was difficult to sell it because it was kind of an artifact of the 60s. And but I think they felt there was enough of it that was still sort of speaking. I mean, we had a small budget actually, and so that allowed us to transform kind of the entrance, the front, and a few windows, and the rest of it was all interior. So I think that there was a balance, I guess I would say.
And I think the board of trustees wanted the entire facade taken off the place. So you're sort of balancing those aspects.
More of an art than the science, I think.
It's a very good point.
Right. That's right. You have to listen to everybody, and you want to listen to everybody because there may be a seed of truth there, and something that actually generates design and generates design solutions. And actually, I think it can be. I've seen people really get infuriated by suggestions, and we are recently actually just have been through, I think, a lot of back and forth with the city of Boston for a building that's going to be built on Newbury Street. You can imagine the preservation discussion there. You have to listen. It might be a seed of design.
I think what you sort of have to have a a clarity of intent and concept that can really sort of survive things. And that's it sort of, you have to have a, as clear a party and sort of a clear as your goal as possible. And generally, if you have that, you're able to convince enough people. And I think there are certain cases where, like certain historic districts, that you should know what you're getting into. Quite honest, and that's sort of the thing is, you should know what you're getting into, and you should actually not be afraid to have the conversation to figure out what's really important, because you may be surprised. Like, you may have someone like me on a commission that says, you know what, can you make it actually more modern, this addition that you're doing? Because I've read the Secretary of the Interior Standards, and I know that sometimes you can contrast, and I think this would be the right thing to do. Or you may actually find out that people, the classic thing is, people aren't as concerned about the house or the building. They're concerned about the landscape. They're concerned about trees and other issues that deserve to be heard. And oftentimes there's other forces that are occurring there that are more sort of political dynamics that you need to be aware of, because those are the ones that you have to avoid changing your design to satisfy a politic that you don't understand. So there's that often happens, and I think that's something that happens a lot with a lot of development projects. It's that they are made worse because someone is focusing on the constituency.
I certainly could comment on that. Because I've had more than one dream. And I think your question is really interesting, because you're right, you're designing without constraints. I had a recurring dream, as probably a number of people do, who have not just graduated from Cornell, but who graduated altogether, thinking about Andrew. I had this recurring dream where I haven't started my thesis, but it is time for the jury, and I'm walking around the drafting room, and I'm noticing that there are some great projects out there, and people have finished them, and they really are beautiful. I'm really impressed. I didn't design any of them. No constraints. Thank you, Andre.
So we're great introduction to, let's go over to the gallery and see that 40 years in there with some here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.